Hey everybody, one that always bored, never boring, and if you like hearing someone blather on about a board game that they've only just received and haven't even played yet, you have come to the right place, because I have received my copy of Cursed City, and I've been talking about this game for months, and now I actually have it in my hands. There's going to be no shutting me up. In this video, I'm going to run through all the components in the box. I'm going to give some initial impressions. I'm going to share some of my thoughts, talk about how it relates to Blackstone Fortress, and really just rattle on and on until everybody gets bored of me. But that's what I do here. This is absolutely not a review. I haven't even assembled the miniatures yet, let alone play the game. But I have poured through the rules, poured through the cards, and I do have some thoughts and feelings, which obviously all must be taken with a pinch of salt, because to a certain degree I am theory crafting. But at this stage I see a lot of good in this game, and a lot of the good I see is because a lot of the game relates back to Shadows over Hammerhal, which is probably my favourite Warhammer Quest game, or at least it would be if Games Workshop had supported it in any way, shape or form. But I do see potential issues with this game as well, things that do give me a little bit of concern. But that's okay, a healthy dose of caution is always advisable when exploring a cursed city. Let's get started. Oh, and for the record, I purchased my copy from Element Games and received it on the day of release. It cost me £112.50. So I did get a discount over the £125 recommended retail price, but not a huge discount. But I was just happy to actually secure a copy, because I am aware that a lot of people missed out on this game and they are worried about when they are going to be able to get hold of it. I hope that for those people checking out my videos and learning more about the game will be a small amount of compensation for missing out, and may even help them to decide whether they really want to put down such a large sum of money on this game. Right, seriously, let's get started. Of course, everybody is excited about the miniatures, so let's start there. You get 60 miniatures in total. They are push-fit miniatures, meaning they go together without glue, but you do need side clippers to get them out of the frames. They are not snap out. Do not be tempted to twist them out of the frame if you're new to Games Workshop. You really need some side cutters to make sure you get these out without damaging them. You will notice that there are some thin components, and you don't need to worry too much about thin components. There is quite a bit of wibble in the plastic. They are hard plastic, so they will snap if you bend them enough, but there's a little bit of a play in there. Don't try and put too much pressure on the thin elements when you are getting them out of the frames, because you may end up with some breakages, and you don't want that when you've paid a lot of money for lovely miniatures. This frame here is the first frame of Heroes, and you can see they are in this sort of bone ivory type colour, rather than the red that we saw in Blackstone Fortress. As you would expect, the details are lovely. I am not going to show these miniatures assembled in this particular video. I simply do not have the time to build all of the miniatures and get this video out in a timely manner, so there will be a separate video where I look at assembling the miniatures and show them all off in their full glory. This is our second hero frame. It is much smaller. It just has the ogre on it and the Dwarden, and you can see really excellent detail. And of course the ogre miniature is pretty big. This game was more expensive than Blackstone Fortress by quite a bit, and I think part of that is just prices are going up, and Games Workshop is always putting their prices up anyway, but I think part of it is also there are quite a few large miniatures in this box. You then get 4 frames of Adversaries. First of all, you have Radukar. He is on a separate frame. He looks quite ridiculous the way they have chopped the miniature up. But he is on his own frame, which suggests that they may release this miniature down the line as a separate blister pack for Age of Sigmar. But you can see he's a big, sizable miniature with really good detailing. I don't need to keep telling you that there's really good detailing on these miniatures. You would expect nothing less. You get one of these gigantic frames, which has the Kosagi vampire ogres and also the huge beastie, the Vargskaya. Again, really big miniatures. And again, if you look at these miniatures, you can see these are the vampires, and they have these very thin fencing swords. Again, you know, you don't have to worry too much about them. There is a bit of flex in there. You don't want to snap them, so treat them carefully, but don't be too panicked about how thin everything looks. A reasonable amount of caution, and you should be fine. Finally, you get 2 of these frames, and these have all your minion gribbly creatures on, so you've got your bats and your rats and your Ulfenkarn, and your zombies, which I still don't know if I like them or not. I will confirm once I have them assembled, but you get 2 of these frames. And then you get a whole bunch of bases for those miniatures. These are all in different sizes. They range from 25mm for the skeletons up to a 50mm base for the Vargskaya. So when you are assembling your miniatures, make sure you check the assembly guide carefully to make sure everything is going on the right size base. The size of the bases do matter for gameplay. Talking of the assembly instructions, you of course get a full assembly booklet, and Games Workshop do a really good job with their instructions. Make sure you check the component images at the front, make sure you understand what the different icons mean, and make sure that when you are building your miniatures, you follow through in step. Make sure you do these things in the right order, because sometimes parts will overlap each other, and you need to make sure that the parts that are in the center of the miniature are done before you place the overlapping parts. And do be aware that there is an errata sheet for the assembly of the Dwarden. It looks like there was a last minute change to his miniature in that a peg was separated from his backpack, so they had to rework how he goes together. Next up is the War Scrolls booklet, and to be honest, I am not going to spend any time on this at all. I think you will find there will be more videos on the War Scrolls and using these miniatures in Age of Sigmar than there are about the game itself when you look around. I am focusing entirely on this as a game in its own right, and not as a source of miniatures for Age of Sigmar. But for those people who are interested, do be aware that these War Scrolls are for all of the miniatures in the box except for the bats and the rats. There are no War Scrolls for those. Also, you get 2 little gargoyle characters in this set, and those don't have War Scrolls either. That's a shame. Next up is the rules book, and this is quite a hefty tome. It weighs in at 40 pages, and there's no real fluff in there at all. There are some pictures at the front of the assembled and painted miniatures, but it's predominantly rules in here. There are tutorials starting at page 12. These are step-by-step guides to help you familiarise yourself with combat, and then the rules proper begin on page 16. I have already read through the rules, and there are some interesting changes from Blackstone Fortress. There are some swings towards Shadows over Hammerhal, and then there are some new elements as well. I will talk a little bit at the end of the video about some of those new elements and how I think they're going to change up the gameplay from Blackstone Fortress, and indeed Shadows over Hammerhal before it. But it certainly looks like an interesting hybrid. It looks like they have learned from some of the mistakes that were made in Blackstone Fortress, but perhaps made new ones as well. And then we have the quest book, which is 56 pages long. There is some fluff at the start. It's mainly character bios for the adversaries and the heroes, and of course the history of the city itself. It doesn't feel as comprehensive as the fluff that was included in Blackstone Fortress, and certainly isn't as interesting as the novella that was included with Shadows over Hammerhal. Blackstone Fortress felt like an immersive narrative adventure. There was a very strong story and a sense of mystery and a sense of wanting to explore what's happening. The fluff that's included here for Cursed City, from the outset, without having really drilled into the game, it feels more like it's there to facilitate the adventure. Oh look, there's a Cursed City. It's run by a vampire. You should go in there and have words with him and save the citizens. I think there is interesting scope for how the narrative develops. And for those of you who don't know, the basic premise is that there was a city that was being attacked by chaos, and then Radukar the vampire came along and saved the city, but then took over the city for himself. You are trying to wrest the city from his grasp, and it almost feels like it's setting up that if you actually succeed in doing that, you are opening the floodgates for a return of the chaos forces, and I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps down the line we end up fighting a war on 2 fronts between undead and chaos. And I say that because quite clearly there will be expansions for this game. I know that for some very obvious reasons. First of all, in the quest book it says This is the first quest in the story. And the way that this game plays is that you undertake a quest, and each quest comprises a series of journeys. All of the journeys you will undertake in this game at the moment are part of a quest called Ulfenkarn in Peril. The quest has its own card for tracking your progress, and a big sealed envelope with a prize inside for when you complete the quest. Quite clearly, the intention is for this game to be expanded. There is supposed to be a continuation of the story beyond Ulfenkarn in Peril, and I think for those people who are still concerned that this was a limited one-shot and that Games Workshop aren't going to release more copies of this game, I really think you can put those fears to bed. I know Games Workshop at the moment are being very mixed with their messages and very cagey in what they're saying, but if they intend to release expansions for this game, they need to make sure the base game is in stock. There is no point expanding a game that people cannot buy. Anyway, back to the point. How does Ulfenkarn in Peril work? The actual quest starts on page 18 of this 56-page book, and I should also point out that 16 pages in this book are taken up by crises. And crises are pretty interesting because they can occur at different points throughout your journeys. And when they occur, you randomly generate one from the table, you turn to that part in the quest book and you read it, and it will give you a choice, and then it will tell you which paragraph to read based on the choice you've made, and then you will see the outcome of your decision. This will be familiar to anybody who has played Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. It is like a mini choose-your-own-adventure game, squeezed into the middle of your dungeon crawl. These crises are also interesting because they can add elements of surprise to missions you are playing. For example, there is one mission which states when you achieve a specific objective, you have to read a certain paragraph from the crises section of the book, and then something else will happen, something that wasn't mentioned in the quest setup instructions. So unlike Blackstone Fortress, where you always knew what was going to happen, now you have elements of doubt. I can't tell you what those twists and turns are because I haven't read any of the crises section. I want to experience those surprises for myself. But it's just interesting to know that there can be moments in that quest where suddenly it says, right, something unexpected has happened. But anyway, the rest of the book is taken up with information regarding the journeys that you can go on. And during Ulfenkarn in Peril, you will go on 4 different types of journey. There are hunts, where you have to go out into the city and kill a certain number of enemies in order to reduce the level of control that Radukar has over the city. When you play a hunt, you will select from one of 8 predetermined maps. There are scavenge journeys where you go out into the city to look for realm stones, which you will use to enhance your weapons. And I'll talk a little bit more about enhancing weapons in a moment. And again, there are 8 different maps for that particular type of journey. Then there are deliverance journeys, which are randomly generated from a deck of exploration cards. Look, here's the deck of exploration cards. There is 1 card for each map tile in the game. So as you explore, as you open doors, you will draw these exploration cards and build the map as you go. And the aim here in the deliverance journeys is to help the citizens to reduce fear throughout the city, because if at any point Radukar's control over the city or the level of fear in the city gets too high, then the quest is failed and you have to start again. Finally, you have the decapitation missions. These are the boss fights where you will take on Radukar or one of his lieutenants in order to destroy them and remove them from the game completely. These are like the strongholds from Blackstone Fortress, so they are played over predetermined maps with extra special rules imposed. Once you have defeated all 6 of the decapitation missions, then the game is over and you have won. You have to achieve that goal before 5 adventurers are killed or the fear or influence in the city gets too high. And I suppose I should mention at this point as well that although you can play this game solo, you are always supposed to have 4 heroes in the game. And there are no rules included for playing with less heroes. You could probably use the rules from the Blackstone Fortress Annual for using less heroes. One of the interesting things about the quest is the way that it's structured around levels. For the first time, we have a leveling up system in a modern Warhammer Quest game. All of the heroes will start at level 0, and then each of the decapitation missions has a specific level that you have to obtain before you can undertake that journey. You can see here that in order to undertake the first decapitation mission, you have to have 4 heroes to go on that mission that are level 1. To take on Captain of the Damned or Shuffling Horrors, you have to have 4 heroes that are level 2. To take on Whisperers in the Dark or Family Ties, you have to have heroes that are level 3. And then for the final assault on Radukar himself, you have to have 4 heroes who are level 4. You gain those levels by gaining experience, and you gain the experience by completing journeys successfully. When you complete your first journey successfully, you require a token which calls you a novice. When you complete a second journey successfully, you replace your novice token with a veteran token, and the third time you complete a journey successfully, you gain a new level. So if you're thinking about replayability for this game, you can work on the basis that you will need to complete 3 journeys before you can take on the first decapitation, then another 3 journeys before you can take on the second and third decapitations, then another 3 journeys before you can take on the 4th and 5th decapitations, and then another 3 journeys before you can take on the 5th and final decapitation. So if you don't factor in any failures, and if my math isn't completely rubbish, I make that a minimum of 18 games to complete this quest. And that's if you're using the same 4 heroes every time. If you want to bring in a new hero, they start at level 0 and you have to build them up. There is a fast track system in place where a hero can gain additional experience by taking part in a successful journey with a character who is already more experienced than they are. But generally, you're adding extra games to your campaign in order to level up additional characters. And while I'm talking about levels, I suppose it's also a good time to mention you get this deck of encounter cards, which will be familiar to anybody who has played Blackstone Fortress. You will draw these encounter cards to determine what enemies are present on a particular journey, and you will see that there are levels, and you will basically look at the level for the most experienced player in your current party. So if you're all level 0 except for 1 who's level 1, you will look at the level 1 line here, and you will spawn enemies of that kind. This means that the game will scale in difficulty as you advance through the levels. Phew, how are we doing for time? I've still got so much to say. Look, dice. A big old bag of dice. You have the white activation dice, the black destiny dice, which will be familiar to anybody who's played previous versions of Modern Quest. You then have the D6, the D8 and the D12 special combat dice, which are lifted directly from Blackstone Fortress. And then you have the Quest dice, which is a D12 rather than the Blackstone Fortress dice, which was a D20. Next up, you have your wedge of 8 hero cards. As I mentioned, you will always have 4 heroes on any given journey. Each hero has a starting side with a path to glory, which defines how they can gain inspiration points. Once they've gained 3 inspiration points, they will automatically inspire, which means they will flip the card over, and then they become more powerful and they gain an additional ability. Furthermore, each character has a specific trait, which grants them a set of special abilities that they will acquire as they level up. For example, here are the traits for a Stalwart, and as they gain each level, they gain a new ability which stacks with all of the previous abilities they have obtained. So you do become moderately stronger as you advance. It is worth noting that those traits are permanent boosts, and those are the only permanent boosts you get in this game. Every time you complete a journey, you will go back from your inspired state to your regular starting state. Each character is allowed a maximum of 1 enhancement on their armor and weapon, and this is something interesting that I sort of predicted during the teasers that Games Workshop were putting out, but it wasn't implemented in the way I expected. I said early on that our heroes have got such powerful weapons, it seems silly that they would find more powerful weapons to replace them with, and that's actually the case. You don't ever replace your weapons. Your characters will always fight with the weapons they brought with them into the city. However, throughout your journeys you will find realm stones, and you can spend realm stones to enhance your existing weapons and armor. You are allowed to enhance your armor once and your weapons once. If you enhance either of them again, then you have to replace the existing enhancement with the new one. You can see here there's a thick deck of empowerment cards split between weapons and armor, and they do things like this. You can get an Aether Sharpened Edge, which will give you +1/+0 to your melee weapons. We have a Featherlight Weapon, which says that 1 reaction dice each turn can be treated as a 6, and so on. So those are the main ways that you will enhance your characters. You will gain your traits by leveling up, and then you can purchase empowerments for your existing weapons and armor. And then on a given journey you may inspire, which will make you more powerful for that one journey. The only other way to improve your effectiveness on a journey is to find treasure. The game comes with a deck of discovery cards. Whenever you find a place where you can search on your journey, you can draw one of these cards, and there's 4 types in the deck. First of all, you have realm stones, which you can keep to purchase empowerments when you return to base. And then the second type of card is, if I can find one, a crisis card, which means a crisis has occurred. The third type is a trap, good old trapped locations. And then finally, there are treasures, and each hero is allowed a maximum of 1 treasure card at any one time. And all of the treasures are single-use items. I love single-use items. I think they create interesting decision points in a game. I've always really enjoyed that idea of I can use it now, but I lose it. And some of these cards are really good because they also do something else I enjoy, where you have to take a negative effect to actually gain the benefit. For example, here we have the Shard of Night, which says, when this treasure card is used, this hero suffers 1 damage, but increase the damage values of all melee type weapons for +1/+2 until the end of the turn. So you take some damage, but you become a bit of a beast in combat for the rest of the turn. And some of these things are really interesting. There's a really nice one here. There's Liquid Courage. When this treasure card is used, pick this hero or 1 hero adjacent to this hero. That hero gains 1 inspiration point and becomes stunned. I think that's really funny. And then there's other types of interesting cards, like the Glow Sand Hourglass. When this treasure card is used, move the Nightfall token counter clockwise 1 space, so it gives you an extra turn before night falls. Those treasure cards are really interesting to me. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of them, and because your heroes are only allowed to hold 1 at a time, it doesn't significantly broaden the tactical choices you're going to have available in any given turn. Acquiring treasures and skills can often be a way of changing the way your character plays so you don't get stuck in a particular rut, but looking at how advancements work in this game, the limit on the number of treasures you can have, the limited ways in which you can power up your weapons and you will always use the same weapons, and the fact that your new skills are tied directly to your trait and you have a linear progression through those upgrade skills means your heroes are always going to play the same way. And I've looked through the traits cards for the 4 different classes, and really the abilities you gain just enhance the way that you would normally play that character anyway. For example, the Stalwart characters all gain abilities that make it easier for them to shrug off wounds. So you're already playing them as tanks because that's what they do, and all of their skills just enhance their tankiness, which is what you would expect, but it also means that you continue to play the way you've always played, you just get better at doing it. It would be nice to have some way to branch out slightly sometimes to have other options available to you. I have noticed that certain characters seem far less interesting than others. For example, poor Captain Emil Braskov here, who looked like one of the coolest characters. She is a very straightforward character to play. She has a single weapon action, which is hit things with her sword. On her turn, she can hit things with her sword. She has a unique ability called the Death Blow, which allows her to hit things twice with her sword. She has one other ability called Battle Instincts, which allows her to change places on the initiative track, which means she gets to hit things with her sword sooner than other people. And when she inspires, she gains a passive ability that she could ignore being stunned or fatigued, which again doesn't give her any new cool things she can do exactly. You're still just going to be hitting things with your sword. Conversely, the Dwarden gets a harpoon gun that allows him to shoot people like he's Scorpion from Mortal Kombat and drags them across the board. He can search items that are far away from him. Again, he hooks them with his harpoon and drags them in. He's allowed to have multiple treasure cards at once, which means he has more scope to create interesting plays and do interesting things on his turn. And it really feels like some of these characters are going to be far more interesting to play than others. Already, I'm looking at the characters, I'm saying the Executioners and the Lore Masters, so the fast, flippy, kicky, shooty ones, and the magic users are far more interesting than the sword fighters and the tanks. Of course, I'm theory crafting to a certain extent here. I haven't played the game yet, so I can't say that initial impression I have is going to translate into actual gameplay, and I may find that it's much more interesting than it seems. But I do feel a little bit like some of the characters, particularly the ones with passive abilities, are going to get into a situation where they're just doing the same thing every turn. Of course, your heroes get a bunch of bad guys to fight against. You have a card for each type of enemy, including all of the lieutenants, and these are all double-sided with a day side and then a night side, which is effectively their inspired side. You want to deal with them before night falls wherever possible. I'm not going to go through all of these cards now. I guess if people are interested, I can do a separate video going through the heroes and what they do and how they play, and also another video where I go through the villains and what they're up to. If people would be interested in seeing that, do let me know in the comments below. But this video is already incredibly long and there's still more to see. The rest of the cards in the game are pretty utilitarian. You have the death cards. These are used to signify when a character has died. You will put them in a wallet with one of these cards, just to indicate that you cannot use them anymore. The reason you need these cards is because, just like in Blackstone Fortress, when you start a journey, you can pick any of the available heroes. You don't get stuck with one character you have to play with all of the time, which is good because if you get bored with a character you're playing, you can switch to a different one. But of course, once 5 of them are dead, the game is over and you will need to restart your quest. I should also note that these death cards are some of the only cards in the game that have artwork, and that is a disappointment. Blackstone Fortress had so many cards with art on, and Cursed City just doesn't. The hero cards and the adversary cards have photographs of the miniatures. The discovery cards don't have art except for one piece of art on the Realm Stone cards, which is the same on every single card. The empowerment cards don't have artwork, but that's understandable to a certain extent because they are empowerments that can be applied to any weapon. And then of course there's no artwork on the encounters or the traits, and the artwork on the exploration cards is just pictures of the map tiles that you need to use for the game. There's nothing like the resource cards in Blackstone Fortress, which is very much what we had to deal with back with Silver Tower and Shadows over Hammerhal. There was a distinct lack of artwork in those games. And while it's not the end of the world, artwork does often enhance a game, and I find it can make it easier to see at a glance what kind of items and treasures you have available to you. If you have several cards in front of you and they're just blocks of text, it's not as easy to remember exactly what they do. And while I'm sure it's not the case, it does make it feel a little bit like AOS is 40K's poorer sibling. For example, look at these stasis envelopes, which you use to store your characters between games in Cursed City. Who remembers the pretty envelopes from Blackstone Fortress? They're not here. The last cards in the box are the initiative cards, which are used as they were used in Blackstone Fortress. You shuffle them up and lay them out, and it determines the order of play for the round. And yes, having just whinged that none of the cards have artwork, I am aware that these little cards do have artwork, but these are just little symbols which are used to track which hero is which on the initiative track, or which adversary for that matter. They're just little symbols. It's not the same thing. Finally, the final components in this box of wonders. You get 5 punch boards, which have all of the map tiles on them, but also any tokens you need for use in game, the initiative tracker, the day-night tracker, all that sort of stuff. The artwork is clearly beautiful on these boards. But, and I feel that with this game there always seems to be a but, there are a few things to note about these boards. First of all, the artwork, while lovely, is completely irrelevant. There is nothing on these tiles that will block line of sight or movement. They are just open spaces. In fact, when you are building the maps, really the only thing that matters is the shape of the board, which is reminiscent of that game Resident Evil 2, where it really didn't matter what the artwork looked like as long as you had the shape of the board right. And that's the same here. This side is no different to this side. It's just this side is an inside location. And That's a bit of a shame, but it does mean that this game is going to play much more like Shadows over Hammerhal. In fact, when it comes to things like line of sight does work how I predicted it would, in that if you are standing in a board, any other enemy or hero on that board is in line of sight. You can see anything on an adjacent board if you are standing adjacent to a door, and similarly anything on that adjacent board can see you if you're standing next to the door. But other than that, there's nothing that's going to block line of sight, nothing that grants cover, nothing that impedes your movement. It's just lovely looking background. The other thing to note, and this is probably more of a disappointment to me because obviously I do like Shadows over Hammerhal, so I don't mind that we have moved a little bit more towards that style of play. But what does bother me a little bit more is that Games Workshop have used a proprietary size for these tiles. These squares are actually 40mm. So if you play Dungeons and Dragons on 25mm grids and things like that, it's not going to be so easy to use these map tiles. The other thing to note is that in most cases these spaces allow one model to enter. However, small models, you're allowed to put 2 in a space, and the small models in this game come on 25mm bases. The other thing to note, much like Shadows over Hammerhal, doorways between boards are marked with these little tokens: open door, closed door. And I think someone somewhere is going to make an absolute killing selling 3D printed doors that open and close, unless Games Workshop have plans of their own. And that's it, that's your lot. I appreciate I have not shown you everything, I've not shown you the contents of every card deck. I'm quite happy to do follow-up videos where I drill deeper into those particular aspects of the game if people want to see. But clearly I have already been talking for a long time and there are a few more things I want to say. I feel like as I've gone through this, I've picked up on things that are negative, and it may sound like I've been very negative about this game. I think that's just because it's in my nature to analyze things and look at things critically. There are clearly things that I'm worried about. Obviously, I've never thought much to the zombie miniatures, although every other miniature in the game looks fantastic. I am a little bit worried about the way that the heroes will progress. I am a little bit worried that they will start to feel very samey and they don't have enough scope to break out and to achieve new things or adopt new playstyles. But I think the quest structure is fantastic. I love that idea of having to go on different types of quests to control the level of fear, the level of influence, to then finally go out and hunt down one of the bosses. I like the sense of agency that gives you. You have to make those choices. What are you going to do? What is the most important thing to do? Do you have time to go on a scavenge hunt to empower your weapon so that you can take on the next boss, or do you just have to go for it? I like that a lot, and I like that it really does make you feel like a group of monster hunters. You are taking the fight to the bad guys. They may turn up in your other journeys, but ultimately you are facing them on your terms, on their ground. I love that. I think that's fantastic. I think the designers have also done a few things to tackle head-on problems that other people had with Blackstone Fortress. One of the issues that a lot of people had was you tended to power up in Blackstone Fortress, and once you were powered up, you just kept getting stronger and the game became easier. It was relatively easy to scale the difficulty to tackle that situation, but it looks like in here in Cursed City they have taken extra steps to minimize that sort of thing. The most obvious is that leveling caps. For example, once you hit level 1, it unlocks the first decapitation mission. Until you have defeated that decapitation mission, any heroes that are level 1 cannot gain any more experience points. You have to defeat decapitation level 1. Once you've done that, you can start gaining experience again. But once you get to level 2, you can't gain any experience again until you've defeated the second and third decapitation missions. So sure, you can go on other missions to power up your weapons or whatever, but you're not gaining experience points and you're not using your time efficiently. I like the fact that you can find treasure, but it's all limited. You can only carry 1 except for the Dwarden, who's allowed 2, and they're single-use items. You can't hoard a lot of stuff and become all-powerful. Furthermore, if you want to power up your weapons and give your weapons a significant boost, you have to go on a special type of scavenge mission, because under normal circumstances it's very hard to find the realm stones you need to level up weapons. But if you go on a specific scavenge mission, it's much easier. While you're on the scavenge mission, Radukar's influence will increase and the fear in the city will increase, so you can't just keep going out and grinding to gain those level ups on your weapon, because you will lose the game. You have to keep that balance, and it minimises how much you can power up your characters. If that wasn't enough, when you complete a journey and you return to the airship, you have an opportunity to spend your realm stones. Any realm stones you don't spend, you have to pay to the Duardin captain of the airship to keep the ship running, so you cannot even accumulate realm stones between missions. And every time that the airship comes to extract you from a journey, you have to roll on a special event table, and that event table may do horrible things to you, like take away your treasure cards. So there is always a risk. Every mission you go on, there is a risk. It's a risk reward, it's a tug of war, it's a balancing act. Very nicely done. The other thing that could happen with Blackstone Fortress is sometimes games could turn into a grind, often with little you could do about it. The things that could cause a game to grind is if you keep rolling low on the reinforcements and the enemies keep coming back, and also if you start to accumulate a lot of grievous wounds. Every grievous wound on your character sheet takes away one of your action dice. And because in Blackstone Fortress you had to return to Precipice in order to get those grievous wounds removed, towards the end of a mission you could start getting to that situation where you're rolling 1 or 2 dice, maybe having to rely on the destiny dice, and your turns became less interesting, there's less you could do. It was a very thematic way of representing how you are slowly bleeding out from numerous wounds, but it could become tiresome under certain situations, especially if you keep rolling those reinforcements back into play as well. Several things have been done in Cursed City that address that concern. First of all, reinforcements don't work the same way in the Cursed City. The way it works now is, at the start of an activation for a particular type of adversary, you have to check how many are left on the board. If you have killed enough of the enemy, they are driven off, in which case all the enemies that are left of that type will make an attack action, and then you remove them from the board and you remove their encounter card from the initiative track. You then draw a new encounter card, which represents a new type of enemy entering the battle. So you're cycling through the types of enemy that you are facing. It's not just a case of, oh, there's a group of rats. Oh, they've reinforced with more rats. Oh, here comes some more rats. It's a case of, oh, here's some rats. We fended those off. Here comes some bats now. That's going to keep things moving a little bit more. It's going to keep the battles a little bit more varied. Within any given battle, you're going to have to change your strategies, because what was working against the rats isn't suddenly going to work against Ulfenkarn skeletons. And that's an interesting way to keep players on their toes. And the journeys are further made more interesting by having the different goals associated with them. It's not just a case of always trying to battle your way through the map to get to an exit point. You have those deliverance missions where you're trying to rescue the citizens. You have the hunt missions where you're trying to kill a certain number of high-ranking enemies. You have the scavenge missions where you are searching for realm stones. And then finally you have the special decapitation missions, which are boss fights with their own special sets of rules. There's quite a lot of variation in there, which means you're not always just doing the same thing against the same enemies. The other thing they've done to stop the game getting too grindy is they have made it so it's a little bit easier to keep hold of your action dice. First of all, they've introduced a run action, which means you can spend a dice with a value of 3 or more to move further than if you used a normal move action. That means you don't have to burn through as many dice to move, giving you more dice to do the other interesting stuff like hitting things around the head. And also, grievous wounds work completely differently now. Effectively, grievous wounds are a way of extending your health bar to 8 points, because each character has 4 activation slots on their board. When they take 1 point of damage, they have to put a wound token on one of those spaces. Oh, as a little aside, it is worth mentioning, if you have to put one of your wound counters on a space that has a dice on it, you have to discard that dice. That is specifically stated in the rules. It was something that was never mentioned in Blackstone Fortress and something that a lot of people argued about, so I'm glad to see it finally clarified in the rulebook. Wound counter on a dice, remove the dice. But anyway, the first time you take a wound, you will put a wound counter over one of the spaces on your character sheet. If you take a second point of damage, you will convert that first wound into a grievous wound. When you take your third point of damage, you put a normal wound on the second space, and then when you take a fourth wound, you turn that wound into a grievous wound as well. So effectively you're putting 2 wounds on each slot on your character sheet. And when you take a recuperate action, a regular success will allow you to remove 1 of your regular wounds, and a critical success will allow you to remove a grievous wound. So the grievous wounds don't hang around as much, and they also don't instantly start clogging up a space on your sheet. You effectively have to take 3 wounds before the second slot on your character sheet is taken away from you. That, in conjunction with Destiny dice, means you should always have a few dice available to you, and it makes it a little bit easier to stay in the game, to stay involved, and it will reduce the number of times that you're spent twiddling your thumbs waiting for an opportunity to do something because you have no action dice left to you. But anyway, I think I've probably talked for long enough by now. I am very excited about this game. There's a lot in here, there's a lot to drill into. I've barely scratched the surface of what you're getting in this box. I do think that if you don't have a great love for miniatures, you might open this box and think, where's my £125 gone? Because a lot of that money has gone into the miniatures. You take the miniatures out, there's not a huge amount of stuff in the box. I think they've been a little bit more economical with what you get or what you need to play the game. Blackstone Fortress always had the sense that it felt quite busy with lots of decks of cards and things. Maybe this isn't that much different, but it just feels a little bit different. The actual contents of the box didn't feel like it was absolutely busting at the seams, but I can certainly see that there's a lot of game in the box. I can't wait to get my miniatures built. I can't wait to actually start playing. I am very excited, despite some reservations. And of course, I must reiterate, any reservations I have are initial gut feelings. They're derived from my knowledge of playing the previous Warhammer Quest games. They are based on just looking at the character sheets and trying to envision how I would use them in an actual game. Any thoughts and preconceived notions are subject to change once the dice hit the table. But that is it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you have stuck with me to this point, you are a legend. If you have liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really liked the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.